In this video, we'll cover how to work with objects within your scene. Primarily, we're going to focus on how to work with static meshes. And static meshes are any 3D models inside Unreal Engine, such as this table, floor, chairs. But this tutorial will also apply to any other actors within the scene, such as the sphere or any of the other gameplay elements inserted into the map. Now, these objects have already been inserted into the map, and we will cover how to do that in another video. But in this tutorial, we're going to focus on how to move, scale, and rotate these objects inside your scene. First is selecting objects. This is very simple. You left click to select any object that you see inside your perspective viewport or any orthographic viewports. And to deselect, you simply hit escape or click off of that object. To delete any object, left click to select it and hit delete. Let's undo. To center your view on any object, left click to select it and press the F key. This will bring the view to that object and frame it. And then once you have that object framed and in the center of your view, if you hold down Alt and then press left click, you can rotate around that object. And if you hold down Alt and right mouse click, you will zoom into that object. Now let's cover how to move, rotate, and scale these objects. Left click to select the object, and you will see a XYZ gizmo show up. You may see a little different gizmo. The current one is for Move tool. If you come up here in the top perspective viewport, you have Move tool, rotate, and scale. This will give you a different gizmo for each of the tools. Left click to enable the Move tool, and if you select any of these axes, you will move the object along that axis. If you get a little closer, you will see there is a little square right in the middle of this axis. If you select the corner of the two axes, you will see that both of these axes light up yellow. That means both of them are active. And if I left click and drag, this will move the object along Y and Z at the same time. I can do the same thing for any other axes. And if I select right in the middle, this will highlight the little white ball right in the middle of all three axes, and it will move that object along X, Y, and Z axes relative to the camera position. Now that's not the best way to position the object, so it's best to use the axes to move that object. And by selecting each of the axes, I'm simply left mouse click, hold, and drag. Now let's press F11 so we get the full view. Now for rotate tool, works very similar, but it will rotate the object. Let's select the rotate tool, and by selecting any of these axes, we will rotate that object along its pivot point. And scale tool will scale that object. If you select right in the middle, this will scale along X, Y, Z together. But if you select an individual axis and you see them light up in yellow, this will scale the object along one single axis. And of course, it's best to scale any object along all of the three axes together, so they stay uniform. Now the fastest way is to not come up here and choose the Move, Rotate, and Scale tool. When you select the object, if you press the spacebar, this will cycle between the Scale, Move, and Rotate tool. You can also hit W for Move, E for Rotate, and R for Scale. And most of the time I use the spacebar key to cycle between all three. Now when you move your object, you have to either select each individual axis to move along that axis, or select multiple axes to move along both of them, or you select the middle to free transform. But there's a shortcut key that you don't have to select each individual axis to move along them. So let's say you selected the object and you don't want to come up here and select each of these axes. You can hold down Control and left click and hold and move the mouse, and this will move the object along X. If you hold down Control and right mouse button, click and hold and drag, this will move the object along Y. and if you hold down Control and press the right and the left mouse button together, hold and drag, this will move the object along Z. So this is a great way to move an object without having to come up and use any of these axes individually. You can be anywhere in the viewport, and simply by selecting an object, you'll be able to move it. This next section is very important, and it has to do with grid snapping. For each of the tools, move, rotate, and scale, you have a setting to enable grid snapping. If we come up here, here's the move, grid snapping, rotate, and scale. Each of these are enabled. That means when we move this object, you can see it being snapped to the grid at 10 unit increments. Let's go ahead and switch this to top view. If we zoom in, currently this grid is set to 10 units. That means each individual square is 10 unreal units. And if we come up here and use the drop down menu, we can set it to a higher value, 50. And you can see that the grid has changed. Now each individual grid unit is 50 units. And if we switch back to perspective and move this chair, this object is now being snapped every 50 units. We can disable the grid snapping, and we can freely move without any snaps. And if we enable, and let's say we increase it to 100, now the chair is being snapped every 100 units. This becomes very important when you are creating an environment and you're using walls, ceiling, and models that have to be snapped together in order to construct your environment. Majority of the time you want to have your grid snapping enabled, and you should not go below 10 or 5 when you are constructing your environment. When you are detailing, you can disable your grid snapping and position some of the objects more freely. But in the beginning, with large set pieces such as this table, these floor plans, these chairs, walls, ceiling, majority of the construction, you should have your grid snapping enabled. In order to change your grid size, there's a hotkey. You can use the bracket keys. So here I'm pressing the bracket keys and increasing the grid size, and using the left bracket key, decreasing the grid size. So the right bracket key will increase and the left bracket key will decrease. The rotate and the scale tool also have grid snaps. If you disable this and we rotate now, we can freely rotate without any snapping. Now let's go ahead and enable, and let's turn this up to 60-degree increments. Now if we rotate, this will snap every 60 degrees. Let's switch it back down to 10. And the scale tool has the same thing. Currently it's set to 0.25, so if we scale this object, it will snap every 0.25 in scale. And if we increase it to 1, and we can disable it. Let's switch it back to default. So grid snapping is extremely important when you construct a new environment, and I have a separate video where we'll talk about player scale and the construction and the size of your environment. And a lot of the size and the scale and dimensions of the environment will have to do with staying on the grid and have your grid snapping enabled in order for your architecture to snap together. Following these rules will save you a lot of time and will help you to construct your environments a lot faster. This next element is very important and it's often overlooked, and that is world and coordinate systems. So let's switch back to Move tool. Currently, this object, this gizmo, when we move this chair, it is using the world coordinate system. That means this movement, this chair, corresponds to the world's XYZ that you see here on the bottom left. If you come up here on the top perspective viewport, you can cycle between the world coordinate system and local coordinate system. World will correspond to the entire world and to the XYZ of the level. When you switch this object to local coordinate system, this will use the object's XYZ, and you can see that this gizmo has changed. So when we switch back to world, we can move this object according to the XYZ of the level. And if we switch to the local, this will switch back to the local coordinate system of the object. And we can move this chair along the local XYZ coordinate system. So if we take this table, currently this table uses XYZ for the world and the local is the same. So if we take this table, let's duplicate it, and I'm going to rotate it. And now if we switch to the local coordinate system and we want to move along its local axes, we can. And if we switch back to the world, we'll move it along the world's XYZ coordinate system. So this becomes very important when you are moving and transforming objects and you want them to move along the world's coordinate system or its local axis coordinate system. The shortcut key for that is Control tilde, and you can switch between world and local. Now let's go ahead and delete this table. There are a couple more things I want to cover before we finish off with this video. Let's switch back to our editor mode. Let's get rid of this full view. Anytime you select an object, you can view the properties of that object in the details panel on the right hand side, right here. Let's pull this off a little bit so we can see it. In here, you will view all of its various properties, such as the name of the static mesh, where it's held within the content folder. You can adjust transformation, location, rotation, and scale of that object, change its material, adjust physics, and so on. There are various properties that you can adjust for that specific object. I'm going to open up a new detail panel so we can see a little bit better. So by selecting the object, you will be able to see the properties of that object and change how that object looks, behaves, and how it's being used within the level. You can also enable more advanced detail panel by coming up here using the drop-down menu and choosing Show All Advanced Detail. This will give you a little bit more. Now some of these are more advanced than what you need to know right now, but it is a good way to get acquainted with various settings for that specific object. Now let's go ahead and close this detail panel. Again, you'll be able to access this detail panel on the bottom right hand side, and just due to my recording size, this window is a little bit small, so you could just simply drag and open this up, but when you are using the editor in its full mode, you'll have a lot more screen space. This detail panel will be different depending on the type of object you select. So what we've been selecting are static meshes, which are 3D models. But if you select any of the actors that are editor specific, such as the sphere reflection capture or player start, you'll see its own settings, its own properties show up for that object, for that actor only. And the last section I want to cover for this video is the world outliner. You can see the world outliner on the top right of the editor, right here. This will list every single object and actor that is being used inside your level. So before we selected these objects individually by looking at them in the perspective viewport. And you will notice that every time you select, this also selects them in the world outliner. So instead of selecting them in the perspective viewport, you can go to the world outliner and select them from there. So let's say we wanted to select the sphere reflection capture or the light source. This will select the object and it'll enable and open up the details panel for that object. And when your scene gets very large, you'll be able to a lot faster to select the object from the world outliner and tweak its properties without having to find it within the world. You can also search for specific objects. So let's say we wanted to find player start, and here it is. Or if we wanted to find chair, here are two static mesh chair actors. Also by double clicking on the actor, this will bring up and frame the view on that actor. So the world outliner is a great way to view all of the objects within your scene, and it will help you to keep everything organized by placing certain actors within their folders and being able to turn on and off the visibility of certain actors in the perspective viewport.